use vehicles. I'll be using Foundry 12.327, Star Wars 1.901, and no active modules. The assumptions for this video are that you've set up the world in a way described in the Getting Started video, and that you're either familiar with the rules or have a book handy to reference. Let's start by exploring the vehicle that I've already set up, an AT-AT. You can click the picture to change it, and you can click the silhouette picture to change it. The armor, silhouette, and handling are here, as well as basic stats. Weapons work similarly to actors, where you can click them to expand. You can click linked qualities. You can right-click them and send them to chat. Or you can click the edit button to see and edit the full sheet. Attachments work the same way. Next up, we have the crew tab. This shows more stats around the ship, as well as including its hyperdrive, if it has one, and whether or not it's a space vehicle. It also shows any crew assigned to the vehicle. Next up is the cargo hold. This shows any items on the ship. The bio, where you can write whatever it is you want. And critical hits, which operate basically the same as critical injuries, except they need to be critical hits. Cool. So with the tabs explained, let's go to making skill checks. There are two ways to roll with the ship weapons by default. First is, similarly to other actors, you can mouse over the picture, turns into a d20, and if you have crew assigned, it will pull the stats from that crew. So here we can see I have an Imperial Armor guy, and his gunnery is two proficiency dice and an ability die, and that's reflected here. And just like normally, the difficulty defaults to average. When we roll that, we can see the person rolling the weapon, the vehicle they're rolling on it, as well as the roll, and the classic weapon card, which in this case somehow missed. Classic Imperial Gunnery. The second way, if you don't want to roll from the weapon directly, is to roll from the crew member. You can click over to the crew tab and click roll on the picture over here instead, which will prompt you for which weapon you want to use. And again, it will default to an average check. There we go. Now we can hit, and you can see the weapon card as normal. This also works for piloting rolls. You may be wondering where these 3 setback dice came from. They came from the handling. So if I make this handling a +1 instead of a -3, we'll see it's adding a boost die. And you may note that this is rolling piloting planetary. That is because this is not set to a space vehicle. If I tick this box, you can see the dice pool changed, and if I roll it again, I'm now rolling piloting space. So we can roll that, and it shows that we're rolling piloting and the pilot roll. Oh wow, he's good at piloting the ship. So that's how you can make skill checks from the vehicle. Next up is creating one. So to create one, we're going to head on over to Vehicles and create one. Just make it a tie. We'll give it a random picture just out of here. I don't know. Troop transport looks good. And we'll give it a random image just to show that that is in fact changeable. We'll give it some defense zones. I know TIE fighters don't have shields, so let's go ahead and make this a TIE defender. So it does have shields. We'll give it some speed. We'll leave everything else the same. But let's give it a weapon. So we'll pop on over here to Vehicles, to Weapons, and we'll give it a concussion missile. And we can now edit this if we want. and it'll show up like that. For ship attachments, you can hit this button, which just creates a generic one, or you can drag an existing attachment on. So let's do that and call it a shield generator module. And we can see that this is viewable in the same way it was before. Cool. So next up, let's define a crew. The way that we do that is just by dragging an actor onto the ship. So I've already gone ahead and created a TIE pilot. So we just drag this TIE pilot over to the crew slot, and it'll ask us what roles do you want to give the TIE pilot. In this case, since it's a TIE Defender, it's crewed by a single person, we're going to give it both pilot and gunner. We can see it's added both. And then again, we can roll the same way as before. So next is prototyping the token, which we're going to want to do. Here, let me make this a bit more clear. If we drag a TIE Defender out, we'll see that by default it doesn't have any bars, even though an actor does. And we can see the one that I set up before does have bars. So first of all, make sure to set the disposition to whatever it is you want, and to optionally link the actor data. I'm not going to do this for a TIE Defender since there's likely to be lots of them. But we're going to go over to Resources, change it to Hovered by Anyone, and change bar 1, which confusingly is the bottom bar, to Hold Trauma, and bar 2, which is the top bar, to System Strain. We're going to update the token, and because we didn't link this, we're going to have to recreate the token. So delete it, drag it back out. You can see now we've got bars. And as you'd expect, if you give it some trauma, it does in fact change. So let's say that we wanted to define a new role. Go to Configure Settings, Star Wars, Configure Crew Roles, and add one. Let's call this Engineer, and use Mechanics. We're going to go ahead and save that. And now if we drag, I don't know, Vader's here, so we'll drag Vader over, and we'll give him the Engineer role. Does Vader not have Mechanics? Vader doesn't have any stats. Let's give him some stats so he can perhaps roll an actual pool. So one thing to note is that that doesn't update live if you update the actor's stats. Okay, so if we roll this, it's not tied to the ship in any way, shape, or form, the difficulty, but it does show in the chat that he's rolling as an engineer on the ship, which is nice for looking back through the chat log after the fact and seeing, oh, right, that engineering check was actually, or that mechanics check was actually an engineering check on the ship, rather than just seeing, you know, this random mechanics check and being like, well, why was he rolling a mechanics check? And why was he doing it so poorly? One thing to note is that ships are, or vehicles in general, are fairly useless in combat if you don't have a pilot set. So by that I mean if we look at this boy and remove all of his roles, which is apparently not doable. That's a bug that I'll fix, hopefully in 1.902. So if we just create a new vehicle and drag it out here, and you know what, let's make this look a bit better. Probably want it to be, I don't know, 4x2. Represent a bit more of a freighter instead of a square picture. If we add him to the combat and attempt to roll initiative, we can't. That's because it's a vehicle. It has nothing to roll initiative. But if we add a pilot to that ship, and then roll initiative, it'll roll using the pilot's stats. So we can in fact roll that, and we can begin combat and do things as this vessel. That doesn't work for huge vessels that have a million people on them, but it does work for, mostly for smaller fighters. I use it for ties that are bothering the player characters.